It's a great pleasure to be here. We don't have that much time, so I'll basically go head on, but just a few remarks first. One is that I have a confession to make, which is that I'm not a scholar, and I'm definitely not a professor. So this will be sort of very basic thing, you know. I'm a doer, I'm a person who is supposed to implement things, policy and so on. So this will be, what does this look like in the real world, in our part of the world? Why and how the Nordic way? It will be a short glimpse only, because we don't have time for more, but hopefully it will inspire you to dig further into this issue and how we are treating this. When we talk about sustainability, it came up as a concept maybe back in the 70s, 80s with the Brundtland Commission report. And at that stage, it was basically focusing on environment and environmental issues. And as we've come to today, it has basically developed into something which is much wider and much broader as a concept than it was in '87. I in fact drafted the first action plan. I came to think about this last night in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for our development assistance on sustainability. A lot of things have happened since. So, let's see, can we get this one to work? Yes, or was that the wrong way? Why did we do a turnaround, policy-wise? Back in the 70s, there was an oil crisis in the world. Denmark was, together with Japan, the country in the world that was most dependent on import of energy. 99% of our energy came from import, mostly oil, 92%, and then a few other things. Contrary to our Swedish and Norwegian friends, we had no hydropower. So we were really badly off when the Arab world decided to put this oil embargo on in '73. Denmark came to a halt, to a standstill, no driving cars during the weekends and so on. So we had to do something. And luckily we then struck oil. Basically we had found a bit of oil in the 60s, and then in the 70s we realized that we had a lot of oil. The Norwegians had much more. Unfortunately, the borders went wrongly. I don't know what happened. But I think at the same time, our politicians were quite wise. They realized that even if we had struck oil, there was a limit to how long that would last. So basically, we were following two avenues. One was to exploit the oil, bring that into Denmark, export it also, but also at the same time think about alternative energy resources. And that's how it all started. And it was driven very much by policy. It was a directive from the government, and our parliament was very much in agreement. I will go through a few slides which will show what was the main thing we did from the 70s and onwards. And that is mainly related to energy. But it made us think about sustainability in a much wider sense. If you look at this slide, you will see we are back here in the 70s, 99% dependent on imported energy. At that stage, we had 2% which were renewable energy. It's quite difficult to see. We saved no water. We basically used it, and then we sent it into the ocean. And the share of household waste recycled was 0. Not the best of records, but we were not alone. Most countries did what you see there. So we got this wake-up call, and I won't take you through all of this, but just show you a few benchmarks. 1985, we had a discussion whether we would do a shortcut. Should we basically go into nuclear power? And I think lots of Danes had thought that this would be the case. The Swedes did this, but the parliament in '85 decided no way. So that door was closed for the future. A blessing in disguise, maybe one could think about this. So 15 years later, we are on 7% of renewables. We are doing relatively badly on the water thing. And household waste is up a little bit, but not very impressive. We had our first ministry established also dealing with these things. And again, here we are focusing very much on resources, not on maybe the way of living, our architecture and so on. That came later in the day. Let's jump ahead to 97. Now things are beginning to move quite rapidly. We have renewable energy up to 18%. We have then, because of the oil, become self-sufficient in energy, and we were also starting to export quite a lot. We had a lot of, or we still have, a lot of natural gas. And you can also see that now we are concerned about water. It's not that we don't have a lot of water, like in this state, for instance. But I think people realized that we were still vulnerable, and you would have summers where there was a lack of water. And it was also expensive in terms of cleaning water. All our water resources are coming from groundwater. We don't have any surface water in Denmark. We are also becoming better citizens, good Vikings. We are recycling our waste a bit. So the thinking of our society start to change during the 90s. Let's then bring us up to where we are at the moment. 2012, 23% renewable. Now we're good on water, we're up to 40%, and we're also recycling our waste. And we are also setting goals for the future. And the last goal set by the Danish government, and you find similar situations in the other Nordic countries, is that by 2050 we will be a fossil-free country. The Swedes are beating us here. They have set a target which is 2045, yeah, which is very good. It's good for competition, and it's good to be an ambassador in that country also. Good inspiration. So basically now we are into this, where the whole society is working on this agenda. If you look at this is a bit easier to see renewable energy in Denmark. You see, and we have the 2030 target, up to 50% in 2030, and it's wind very much. We are one of the nations in the world which has the largest production of wind energy, and we also have some of the companies which are among the largest in terms of producing windmills. There's another one which is even more interesting, and that is this one. This is the EU. So unfortunately you don't find Iceland and Norway, but they would be placed very well on this. Here you see the 2020 target and whether we have reached that by now. You will also see here that you have Sweden, Finland and Denmark among the first 5 countries. So the Swedes are up to more than 50% in renewable energy. Are there any Swedes around here? Okay, now I have to be careful. Because you're also cheating a little bit. Together with the Finns and the Norwegians. Because the thing is that the Swedes and the Norwegians, they have hydropower. And you've always had that. And you've been very good at using that source of energy. So you, in fact, by nature, were blessed with a renewable source of energy. If anyone have ever been to Denmark, it's a very flat country. Yeah?
I have.
You have? Okay. And you probably also know that our highest point is about 183 meters, which is almost not, it's not a mountain, it's a hill. So we had to start from scratch, basically, on renewables. And solar plays a role in our part of the world, but it's very much wind and it's hydro. So that's the EU, and you see all countries are moving in the right direction, and I think as a whole the EU will be reaching their targets in 2040, 45 and 50. Let's go to the most important one. So, what happens when you cut down on energy supplies? What happens when you cut down on water use? Well, the good Latin was based back in the 80s that it is not possible then to increase your production. And you want to produce, you want to increase your GDP and so on. So what we've done is basically not possible. And this is some of the things that the Nordic countries have been very good in arguing, that it is possible to save on energy resources, on water and so on, and at the same time increase your economy rather drastically. If you look at this from 1980 up till today, we have almost doubled our GDP. But we've decreased our water consumption, CO2 emission, and energy consumption. So it is possible. And it's even maybe also good business. But I'll come back to this a bit later. Let's look at another thing, or maybe before I show this one. When you then talk about the way to be sustainable or the way to grow, we have started off by saying we will measure your GDP. So are you doing very well economically? We look at your GDP. But it's not a very sophisticated way of showing that you're doing quite well. So some very bright people have invented new indexes for how you measure whether you in fact are a sustainable country and whether your development is sustainable. I won't go into the inclusive index, how it's organized, but it's basically built on a number of different pillars, which covers social issues, inclusiveness, also how the wealth of your country is divided between the various groups in society. And the whole idea with this, of course, is to say the kind of growth or the kind of economy you have in your country, is that sustainable? Will that last? Or are you basically just using your resources and you will see a very quick upturn and then eventually a very quick downfall also in your economy? And here again, we are modest people. Robert, I'm right, you're right. But I have to brag a bit today, because if you look at who are up sort of front, you will find European countries, and among the first 6, 4 of them are Danish. I went in an Uber last night and I talked to the driver about the Nordic countries, and she said, Switzerland is part of the Nordic countries. Isn't that right? So they could have been. So, but this is a very important way of looking at how your society is doing. So then we come into this pin, which is the Sustainable Development Goals. Probably most of you know about this, so I won't bore you with all the details, but basically say that they came about, I think partly because the Norwegian Prime Minister back in the 80s made this report on sustainability. And on the shoulders of this report there was the Millennium Goals, and on their shoulders we have now built the SDGs, which are basically 17 goals, how to organize the world, anything from poverty alleviation over water, health, education and so on. And saying by 2030 we have set these goals and we want to reach those. Many people have different views on the United Nations. Some believe that it's a very useful, very good organization, necessary. Others believe that it's a lot of garbage. Sorry to say so. I've worked with the UN for quite a number of years, but I think everybody agrees that it's also a necessary organization. And one of the very bright things that the UN has done is basically to get the world to agree on these goals. They mean different things in different countries. Some countries are very, for those it's very important to look at the poverty alleviation, for instance. Others, like the Nordics and European and the US, this may be less important. But the thing is that you have a common agenda. That's the important thing. And it's also one where most countries are committed to work with these SDGs. So, in a sense, it's a business plan for the whole world. We've never had that before. You may then argue, well, is it really a business plan for the whole world? I mean, you can give a hoot about it if you like. But that's not the case. Most countries are working on this business plan. And the important thing is also that it becomes then part and parcel of your government's policy. So when you want to invest, you're looking at these goals and saying, okay, water is important, energy is important, education is important, and we want to live up to this. So your government plans are basically tagging in to this, these goals. So that's why it's important. It's hard to disagree. It really makes a lot of sense. Even for the most skeptic people of globalization and whatever, it makes a lot of sense. And it's ethically also right. I haven't met anyone who would basically take any of these measures and say, this is not what we should be doing. We can give it different priorities, but it's a very good way of handling the world. But the last one, that is important. It's good business. And how is that? Why is that? Well, if I look at the Nordic countries, and I look at both our export sector, but also the businesses that have grown, we see that the ones who have dealt with the green agenda, the ones who have gone into water, energy, finding sophisticated means to take care of our resources, they have done very well. Because there's a host of other countries who would like to use that knowledge, to use the products of these companies. And I think if we look at our different business sectors, this is one of the ones that has done absolutely, was the top performer, exporting and also in production. So for the economists, who are very often sort of hard-nosed people who don't take yes or no for an answer, also for those it makes sense. So how are the different countries doing on the SDGs? There's an index which basically shows where are you according to the plan, the goals that have been set, and this is being measured by the UN. And it's a very good yardstick because it holds governments, individual ministries, civil servants, but also the private sector holds them accountable. So you can see basically where you are. And I would agree with Robert that yes, we have gone a bit of the way, but also the Nordics have a lot to achieve still. So we need to work with this very seriously. Again, here you see, I'm sorry that the United States, it's a bit down, but I mean, we're not doing too badly here. There are a number of other countries on the other side, but still, you see Europe and you see particularly the Nordic countries again here working very hard on this agenda. So we don't do it just because it's altruistic, it's right, but we do it also because it's part of our business plan. And no, let me just stay with this a bit. If you look at society in the Nordic countries, you will detect that if you go into larger companies, but even also smaller companies, you will very often see this one, and you will see the 17 goals in the business plan of these companies. So that has been a new sort of set of working, and it's part of their strategy. For some, it is the strategy. I remember one of the CEOs of a very successful company. It's one of the biggest producers of water pumps in the world. Grundfos, it's called. And they sell their pumps all over the world, top-notch quality. And 20 years ago, if you were to ask the CEO, what are you doing? He would say, we do the best pumps in the world. Now the CEO never talks about his pumps. He basically says, I'm providing high quality water to the world. And then he goes into these goals, basically follow those, and these have become the backbone of the company. And that is a way to show that the whole sustainability issue is a much wider issue than it used to be, just talking about environment and saving our resources. I went the other day to a medium-sized city in Sweden called Eskilstuna, 125 kilometers west of Stockholm, to see how they were working with the SDGs. And I was flabbergasted, I must say, because it turned out that the whole community, the whole municipality, basically had taken these 17 goals, put them on the board and said, first of all, we will start with the discussion with the entire municipality. So 3,000 people from the municipality started a discussion on how we're going to achieve this, what is important for our municipality, where do we want to put our money, and where do we want to put our political priorities. Once they'd been through this basically sort of big democratic discussion, they set the goals in each of these areas, and then they have started working on it. And it's amazing, you know, what they have been able to do just in a couple of years, setting totally new priorities. Basically, whenever they think of something, they look at this and then say, okay, how does that fit with the goals of the world, or the world's business plan? If it doesn't fit, we won't do it. So it's anything from bicycling to architecture to creating new kinds of businesses, recycling and so on. Quite amazing. There'll be time for questions and comments later on, so I will move on very quickly. The other thing, of course, is we have to be innovative, also in tackling the sustainability question. If we are not innovative, we won't be able to make these goals. And there's this innovation index in Europe, because you could fear that the Nordic countries being very regulated, some would say even that the government has too much say and so on, that we are not innovative, because why should you be innovative if you have our systems? It turns out that we are, in fact, fairly innovative in Europe. And the good thing about living in Stockholm is also that Stockholm is the most innovative region in Europe. Copenhagen is second, which is okay. But even better, Stockholm is, I think, the second most innovative region in the world. And you sense that when you live and work in Stockholm, that there's so much going on. This state, I'm going to Palo Alto tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow, I'm looking very much forward to that. We are very much also inspired of what's happening in this state, also in your country, but particularly in California. And we have placed one of our biggest consular generals in Palo Alto, particularly for that reason. We have nominated a tech ambassador as the first tech ambassador in the world, and he's also based in Palo Alto. So we need that inspiration to maintain that position. Last one, I think I would just mention this one. That's another competitive index. It basically looks at, in order to be sustainable and competitive, you look at how is your governance. Is it a transparent governance? Is it CSR? How is your intellectual capital managed? And your natural capital, social capital, and so on. And you put that all into the machine, and then you look at, so who is really not only competitive, but who is also covering all these so that it becomes a sustainable competitiveness. And that's why maybe some of the economists will be sad that the GDP thing is sort of dwindling in importance. It is still important, but it has to be seen in this context. And this is very hard to see, but this is sort of the Sustainable Competitiveness Index. And I'm sorry to say that out of the 5 first, they're all Nordics. And this is why we take this agenda very seriously. And we also hope, and that is maybe one of the other things which is important for us, we are small countries. We're extremely dependent on our export, our relation to other countries. And if we were not up there, we wouldn't be able to maintain our position. So for us, economically, socially, whatever, it is very important that we keep that kind of position. So, are we also happy with all the things we are doing? Well, we've lost the first place, but we've lost it to the Finns. And the Norwegians and the Icelandic. The Swedes are a bit further down, but that's because Swedes are very serious people. And sometimes they can't really think of whether they're happy. They are very sort of focused on what is important in life.
This is being recorded, Ambassador. Just as a
so I
reminder.
may not be able to get back to my home. No. But of course, it's you can always discuss, you know, how do you measure happiness and so on. We haven't done it ourselves, let me say that first of all. But it is very important to say the things that we have done, which I've talked about, does that one make sense to your population? Does that probably give them a sound economy? Do they have access to whatever they would like, or do they feel that this new agenda are forcing them to do things that they don't like or would rather see another kind of policy? And I think if you look at all these indicators, that we are still a joyful part of the world. Some might say naive, we will take that, that's okay. As long as you're up there, it's okay. So that is sort of a very quick glimpse of where we are on this sustainability agenda. And we believe that it's very important that we talk about this with other nations, other societies. One last thing maybe I should mention, that is, who are going to have the power in the future to run business? Will it be run by large companies, corporations, by governments, by regions? My sense is that it will more and more be run by large cities. And there is a very important cooperation between cities. It's called C40, where there's a number of cities all over the world where the mayors and their administrations are discussing the developments, lending their experience to each other, and working also very much on this agenda. And as you've seen in this country, some of these cities will basically take over some of the policy if their governments are not following the policy that they like. So, in the case of Denmark, for instance, Copenhagen has decided by 2030 they will be at this stage. So if the Danish government is not doing that for the whole of the country, it's okay. We will just go ahead. We will do this as Copenhagen because it's so important for them as a trademark, for their citizens and so on. And this is also, I think, what you see in the US, that you have certain states sort of basically racing out the highway, and others who are a bit more reluctant maybe, and who have different circumstances, of course, also. So that is, that's another thing, that the power, the division of power and the power structure is changing relatively rapidly. And I sense that when I talk to politicians who are in our parliament, they don't like to hear this. But when I talk to the mayor of Copenhagen, he thinks this is the way to go.